Okay, John chapter 10 is the Good Shepherd. This is our last shepherding, specific shepherding conversation. We've got who are these men and what do they do? And so the first thing that we talked about is that we said they're called elders. And that is a description of who they are. And when you look into the Bible, it's also a description of what they do. They're leaders by virtue of being older, wiser, more experienced people who hopefully know how to walk around landmines where somebody else might not. So elders. We've got overseers. And that class was really pretty straightforward and easy, I think. Who is an overseer? What does an overseer do? He oversees. They, plural, oversee. That's pretty self-explanatory. And then we did shepherds, and this is our third class on shepherds, talking about them. And to talk about shepherds or pastors, we've looked at Ezekiel 34. We've been in Ezekiel 34 twice. And so this was the first time in Ezekiel 34. Verses 1 through 6 mostly is the shepherds of Israel have not done what they're supposed to do. And here is that description. And we talked about that at length. And then once you get to verse 11, God says, okay, my shepherds have not done what they're supposed to do, so I myself will shepherd. And God says, this is what I'm going to do as the shepherd of my people. And so here's an affirmative description of what God expects from his shepherds and how they work. And for each one of these things, you know, there's been, I think, we have not even begun to exhaust the conversation. For each one of these points, you know, there's a million applications about, well, there's this one time that I saw this, and there's this one time that I could have done this better, and this is a principle that goes with this. And so I hope that you're not just looking at these bullet points thinking, you know, those are just a bunch of silly bullet points. This is what we're after here. This is what we're trying to be as individual Christians and what we're looking for as men to shepherd the flock, the congregation. So are there any comments or questions or thoughts or anything up to this point about elders, overseers, or shepherds as we've talked about them in Ezekiel 34? Anything by way of review? All right. Well then, today what we're going to do is we're going to look at John chapter 10, and this is one where there's going to have to be just lots of your input, lots of your conversation, because Jesus says some of these things, but the application of them and what they look like is really going to be for us to try and flesh that out. So let's go ahead. Somebody, would you read for us, please, John chapter 10, and would you go ahead and read all the way to verse 18? It's a little longer than the shepherd section, but I think that'll give us good context. John 10, 1 to 18.
Truly, truly, I say to you, he who does not enter the sheepfold by the door, but climbs in by another way, that man is a thief and a robber. But he who enters by the door is the shepherd of the sheep. To him the gatekeeper opens, the sheep hear his voice, and he calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. When he has brought out all his own, he goes before them, and the sheep follow him, for they know his voice. A stranger they will not follow, but they will flee from him, for they do not know the voice of strangers. This figure of speech Jesus used with them, but they did not understand what he was saying to them. So Jesus again said to them, Truly, truly, I say to you, I am the door of the sheep. All who came before me are thieves and robbers, but the sheep did not listen to them. I am the door. If anyone enters by me, he will be saved and will go in and out and find pasture. The thief comes and only steals and kill and destroy. I came that they may have life and have it abundantly. I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. He who is a hired hand and not a shepherd, who does not own the sheep, sees the wolf coming and leaves the sheep and flees. And the wolf snatches them and scatters them. He flees because he is a hired hand and cares nothing for the sheep. I am the good shepherd. I know my own, and my own know me, just as the Father knows me, and I know the Father. And I lay down my life for the sheep. And I have other sheep that are not of this fold. I must bring them also, and they will listen to my voice. So there will be one flock, one shepherd. For this reason the Father loves me, because I lay down my life, that I may pick it up again. No one takes it from me, but I lay it down of my own accord. I have authority to lay it down, and I have authority to take it up again. This charge I have received from my Father.
Thanks, Kevin, for reading that. Okay, so just a big shotgun approach here. What do we learn about shepherding as Jesus says, I'm the good shepherd? What are our big points from what we just read? And you don't have to, I'm not going to push you to go any deeper on any of these if you don't want, but just broadly, what are some things that you saw that we're going to need to talk about now?
6 or 7 times they say, they know. It's repetitive.
Yeah. So Jesus knows his sheep, which is, I guess Jesus says, I know my sheep, but he also says my sheep know me, right? There's a two-way thing on that. And that would be a really good use of what I do sometimes with the Galatians thing too. Print out a paper, and that's what you do with a certain color. And you say, okay, look, how many times is it here? Because it seems like it's a lot. I haven't done that, but I would guess that's what we would see. So the shepherd knows his sheep, and the sheep know the shepherd. And then what we're going to want to do today in this conversation is to say, what does that mean and what does that look like? What are we doing with that? That would be a good one. Other thoughts? What else did you see? Mark? Oh, sorry. Who? No, go ahead.
The sheep follow the shepherd.
Okay.
They willingly follow the shepherd. They know the shepherd. They follow the shepherd.
So you really emphasize, you said the sheep follow the shepherd. And what's your emphasis there? Because I think I have a different emphasis than you. But what is yours? You said the sheep know, right? Oh, hey, that's my shepherd. I'm going to follow my shepherd, right? Is that kind of what you're getting at? What I hear is the sheep follow the shepherd. Is the shepherd is not behind them with a taser, prodding them along. The shepherd is in front of them saying, come on, sheep, and the sheep follow after. And there's two different things there, right? Two very big principles worth talking about, I think. So yeah, the following, that's good. Mark, you had one?
I was going to say he's the door. He is the door. He's the way in.
Yeah, so you've got this concept of, here's the fold. Why does the fold exist in the first place? Let's call it a fence or a pen. Why does the pen exist in the first place? To protect, to keep together, keep bad guys out, keep the good guys in, right? And Jesus is the door, which is a picture of what? I mean, what if we're going to think of it like that?
It offers security for those who come in and to come out, because there's only one way. He's the gatekeeper of the door, so he determines who comes and goes.
Yeah, so that's there's probably some really good principles inside of that conversation. Others? Yeah, Maria?
But with that door, I think it also, that's what provides access
To be among the sheep?
to be with God.
Yeah. Got to go through the door. And there's even a specific section in what we just read. You can't jump over the fence. That's what the bad guy does. You got to come through the door. And to come through the door, you got to go through Jesus. Did I see one over here? Yeah, Kevin.
What Mark had just said, got me thinking, but another thing about the sheepfold is that it identifies your sheep. You know, like I'm thinking about, you know, cattle ranches or something, like those are your cows, this is your property and your land. And something that had stuck out to me a lot throughout was that he calls his own sheep. These are his sheep. The enclosure identifies them as part of his own. So it's kind of a designation.
Yeah. Yeah. More of, I'm trying to think of how to say what I think is in my head. It's more of, if you're in here, it's because you came through Jesus. Identity might be what I'm trying to say. It's an identifier that you're here. Because nobody in here can be in here without having come through the Jesus door. Maybe we can talk more about that. I like that idea. Hold on, I saw Dave pointed at, was it Jay? Jay and then Tracy.
One of the things that I was looking at was the negative point of view. What they're not. They're not the hired hand. They don't really care. Like if you think of somebody who's going to run at the wolf coming, the owner or the shepherd at his own peril is going to take care of his sheep. You know, that there's an implication there that there's something very risky for the shepherd.
Yeah.
To stay involved.
Yeah. And I see that the shepherd is invested in this work. Like that's his life. That's how we're going to eat, you know. If you're the hired hand, you're getting paid to be there, and that's how you eat. But the shepherd is like, that's how I eat. So we'll talk a lot about that one, I think. Tracy?
So I think this is probably glaringly obvious to everyone but me. But where it says, I will go in and out and find, they will go in and out and find pasture. Obviously the sheep still need to eat. So what's the application to us in that, going in and out of the gate to find pasture?
I think it would maybe, this is how I understand it, and maybe somebody could correct me on this, but I understand it as the pen, the fold is where we go at night when there's a threat and we all need to be together and sleep. And then in the daytime, we leave the fold and we eat and drink until it's night again, and then we come back in. But we can't go back in unless we go through Jesus. That's where the protection is. So I'm not sure where to press the metaphor. You know what I'm saying? Like, I'm not sure where to take. Maybe we can. Somebody might be able to.
Deuteronomy chapter 28, verse 6 says, blessed shall you be when you come in, and blessed shall you be when you go out.
Yes.
So, but it's that door that you go in and out of, and it's Jesus who's there opening the door. He's the door. But you're blessed when you leave, and you're blessed when you come back in.
So it's just daily life. A picture of life. Let's start this list here. I'm sure that these are the things that I have on my list. We may go through here in the order of the text, and you may say, well, Ryan, you missed one, and I'll add it to my list. That's good. This is not the definitive thing. This is just what I saw. Verses 1 and 2. Truly, truly, I say to you, he who does not enter the sheepfold by the door, but climbs in by another way, that man is a thief and a robber. But he who enters by the door is the shepherd of the sheep. So you've got a description of two people, and this is just really simplified, I think, in my head. You've got a description of two people in regards to the sheep. There's a good guy and a bad guy. The shepherd is the good guy who takes care of them. The robber and the thief is a bad guy who is basically Ezekiel 34, where the shepherds didn't do what they were supposed to do. That's basically a description, I think, of the bad guy. And I think that you can see in Acts chapter 20, I think that you can see this picture of the good guy and the bad guy in Acts chapter 20 and verse 28, pay careful attention to yourselves. This is Paul talking to the elders of the Ephesian church. Pay careful attention to yourselves and to all the flock in which the Holy Spirit has made you overseers to care for, to shepherd the church of God, which he obtained with his own blood. I know that after my departure, fierce wolves will come in among you, not sparing the flock. And he goes on to say, he says, and from among your own selves will arise men speaking twisted things to draw away the disciples after them. I think that's the danger that he's describing, is that the thief comes in to draw the sheep after them. It's for me and for my purpose. Follow me, not follow Jesus. And I have really distilled this point in my own head down, the difference between the good guy and the bad guy, to the shepherd that we're looking for is not a threat. I think that's my bottom line. Now maybe how do you distill it? Where do you see it? Because that's really the good guy and the bad guy, caring for the sheep, harming the sheep. The bad guy is the thief who draws the sheep after himself, and that is a threat to the flock as a whole. Go ahead with the critique.
I wonder if they had corporate pens where multiple shepherds kept their sheep. Because it says they don't know the voice of strangers, which is not necessarily the thief. It says, my sheep know my name, or they know me, and I know them, and I call them by name. But they won't go to a stranger. So I don't know if they're shared pen, because there's like, bad shepherds, or shepherds that those aren't their sheep. So they select or call their sheep, and they only follow him, as well as their Steve.
Yeah. Now that is a part of my reading, that in these shepherding communities, here is a big fold, and it's like a community fold where we all put our sheep. And the only thing that I will say about that is that I don't know anything about it, so I won't say anything about it. But yes, I mean, the reading that I've done supports what you're saying. I just can't comment because I don't know. I'm ignorant on that point. Benny, did you have one? Okay. Another? Yeah, George?
Not one and two, but overall, I kind of get the idea of somebody who takes away and someone who's
I can't hear, George. I'm sorry.
I said, overall, I get the idea of someone who is there to take away versus someone who has come to give.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And we've kind of beat that drum with Ezekiel 34, especially in the theme that I did with Ezekiel 34 is the sheep are here for me versus I'm here for the sheep. Those are different. So, yeah. But the point is that he's not a threat. Mary, the good shepherd.
I just want to point out that yesterday somebody left the gate open. Family friend, named Dave. I was telling him who did it. Left the gate open. And of course the sheep came flooding out. And they know me. They associate me with food. And so it didn't take me but a minute to get them put away and put back in, because they know me and they come to me, they follow me. But I can guarantee they would not have done that for you if you would have been there. So that's just my.
We should do that someday and video it. Seriously, a video of that would be a lot better than us trying to wander through never having seen it before. That'd be good.
I mean,
Kevin?
They almost stampede me because they're so close to me, but they know me, they're friendly. To me, they aren't anybody else. But I have no fear, even though they're crowding around me and stampeding me when I'm putting them in. So.
That's good. I'm really glad that you're here with your experience for that.
Going along with the idea that Jesus is not a threat to them, I had other people that aren't Jesus that Jesus metaphorically talks about. He has thief, robber, strangers. He said stranger twice, mentions thief again. the shepherd multiple times in the middle of like all these other people that are interacting with the sheep.
Yeah. I'm glad that you made that list too. All the descriptors of the bad. Dave, did you have one? And then we'll press forward.
I was thinking in the context here of John 9 and 10, you've got, or John 10, we talked about knowing and hearing, and then the voice is repeated, or voice is repeated in this text as well, of 1 through 18. And I thought that was interesting in contrast to chapter 9, because there Jesus heals a man born blind, but the people are not seeing. And pairing that with chapter 10, they are hearing his voice, and they're trusting his voice, and they don't follow the stranger's voice. So I see a contrast of what is seen and believed and what is heard and believed. So I think that's interesting in how he uses the shepherd image in illustration to identify the magnitude and importance of hearing, and how that's where the trust is. It's in the hearing of the voice. It's in the hearing of the one who is trustworthy, and the truth that is in the one who's constantly feeding and providing the food and safety and security, as opposed to the man born blind who's now seeing, and all the evidence points to Jesus as the healer, the provider, and the good person. And yet they're not hearing Jesus as that. I know we're getting more into the John text and not the illustration of our shepherding, but the reality, what I draw from that is that a person can look the part, but not speak the part, and not be the part. And so that's a distinction I think is very valuable to understand of our shepherds who are wanting to be leading and not necessarily looking.
Yeah, oh, yeah. That's a great application. And I think that pushes us right to Ephesians 4. Shepherd teachers. The shepherd teachers, they're as a unit. We hear the word of God through them. Okay, verse 3 would be another thing to say about this. To him the gatekeeper opens, the sheep hear his voice, and he calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. And I think what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go ahead and put the next 3 up together. I've blocked them together. This is Lisa's point, I think. Verse 3 is, he knows his sheep and leads them. Verse 4 is, when he has brought out all his own, he goes before them, and the sheep follow him, for they know his voice. So verse 4 is going to be the opposite of that. Verse 3 is, he knows the sheep and leads them. Verse 4 is, the sheep know him and follow him. It's just the opposite in the 2 verses. 2 things worth talking about, though. And then in verse 5, this one might be one that needs a separate conversation, but it seems like it goes here. It says, a stranger they will not follow, but they will flee from him, for they do not know the voice of a stranger. So, let's just summarize it here. He knows the sheep and leads them. The sheep know him and follow him. And the sheep don't know the stranger and won't follow the stranger. What are your principles here? And just your real life, like what does this mean? What does this look like in real life? Tracy and then Lisa.
So just, and Becky can probably attest to this too, being a substitute teacher, I find it very, very ineffective when I don't know the names of the kids. It makes it really hard. So like it says, to the sheep hear his voice and he calls them by name. And so you feel like you're a lot more effective when you can talk to them and know their names and call them out for things. I don't know, that just jumped to my mind.
Oh, yeah. And what happens when the substitute shows up? I get to hear those stories every day. Sometimes, no, I won't say that. That's not a lot. We'll go to Lisa here for a second, but then I want to say this on our way from Lisa. Brooke and I were talking after class last Sunday, and she said, a teacher is basically a shepherd. Every single thing that we're describing in this class is teacher stuff. And so maybe we can have some of that chiming in here with some of these, but knowing.
Right. All 3 verses, it's a relationship, and that's what you see. There's no such thing as a silent shepherd. It just can't be. They have to know his voice, and his provisions for them builds trust, and that's a relationship.
Yeah. So, yeah, I probably need to write that down. With knowing, the key for the knowing passages, he knows the sheep, has a relationship with him. The sheep know him, have a relationship with him. They won't follow a stranger, doesn't have a relationship. So relationship is key. That's good. Hold on, I see some hands out in my peripheral, but I can't do 2 things at once. Becky?
I was just thinking, like, as it applies for elders, so the elders should be, as far as the voice that they're speaking, it should be the words of God. Like, there should be leading us in his ways. So that's how we can identify them.
Yeah. The shepherd teacher. I'm going to keep coming back to that because that's exactly what God calls him. He calls him a shepherd teacher. They shepherd by leading with the word of God. Ed?
Yeah, I think you get the application when a group chooses elders, that they have trust in this person, they know this person to lead them, what that was talking about. Because it's not a popularity contest, like the absolute, what he's trying to do. I'm looking out basically for the sheep, for himself, but the congregation is involved, follow a person because they know him, they trust him. And it's important, that's part of how we develop the idea of this principle that I think that elders will need the support of the congregation behind you to begin with. They know you enough, trust you enough, to lead you spiritually enough to want to follow you.
Yeah. Yeah. Then I'll tell you what I think of when you say that. I am happy to report that things in our home are a lot more at peace than they were for. I'm not allowed to talk about my kids in sermons, but does that count when my kids are not here? I'll just make an exception for this one rule. For Luke, 6th, 7th, and 8th grade were progressively worse and worse and worse. And he's a sophomore now, for those of you who don't know. But by the time we got to the end of 8th grade, Becky and I were near despair. I just don't know what to do with this guy. I mean, really, like I didn't know what to do with him. I think that the Hulls were involved with us. We had some time that we spent together during that time. And, you know, here I am with 3 kids and they don't have any, and I'm just, help me, like I'm desperate. Anybody, tell me what to do with this because I don't know what to do with this guy. And it's getting worse by the end of 8th grade, and I called in tears a handful of guys in this congregation who I trust, who I know, who have demonstrated the ability to do what I want to accomplish. And I said, you got to help me. And they did. And that's this. Like that, it's one thing to say the sheep know the shepherd and the shepherd knows the sheep. That's the concept and that's the principle. But the application is, my family, like I feel like I'm losing my son here. And I don't know what to do about it. And I need somebody who I know can help me in this time. And that is this. That's what this looks like to me practically in real life. And so here we are, you know, a congregation. And for the most part, good. I mean, for the most part. But there's stuff that pops up, from time to time. And it's nice when you have people who consistently, habitually have demonstrated the ability to make good decisions and to walk in the right direction, to just ask the question, what do you think? I'll follow you. I'll follow you on this one. That's what Ed is. I don't know if that's where you were going, but that's what I hear what you're saying is to know and to trust and to lead and to follow. All good things. I'm happy to report that after the summer of 8th grade, something happened, and I wish that I could tell you what it was. I'd preach a sermon if I knew what it was, but something happened, and Luke just decided he was going that way and turned around, and Becky and I just said, don't shake anything right now. Like, I don't know what's happening, but just leave it alone because it's coming back. And so if I ever figure it out, I'll make sure to let you know. But we're going this direction now, and I'm happy about that. Okay, others. The sheep know the shepherd. The shepherd knows the sheep. Adam?
Hard to follow, but on the subject of like the familiar voice, I was thinking of 1 Peter 5, where Peter charges the shepherds to shepherd well, and then says, when the chief shepherd appears, you'll receive your crown. So it's kind of like the elder shepherd is a steward shepherd who's pointing back to the main shepherd, and that familiar voice is that they're echoing the voice of Christ that's pointing us back towards his shepherding, and they're keeping us on his path. Not their own.
Yeah. I keep thinking of this too. The sheep hear my voice. That shouldn't be different from us. When there's a shepherd, the sheep should hear Jesus' voice. Kevin, and then, is that, I think it's Stuart. It was coming from Jonah's side. Kevin, and then Stuart.
Going back to the idea of the relationship, right at the end of the section that we read, Jesus circles back and emphasizes his relationship with the Father. So the sheep have a relationship with Christ, and Christ has a relationship with the Father. And then he also emphasizes his authority at the end, and I think those are significant elements of shepherding, is the authority and especially spiritually, the ultimate relationship with the Father.
Yeah. Yes. And I think that we're going to have to talk about that. In fact, I do have it in the schedule to talk about that. I'm really trying to, like at this point, I'm trying to stay away from this. And I'm not criticizing your comment here, but I'm just speaking out loud, like the direction that I'm going. There is a sense in which the shepherd says, get back in the pen, and the sheep may say no. And so the shepherd just picks up a stick and hits the dumb little animal and says, get back in the pen right now. I mean, I imagine there's a sense of authority that we're going to have to talk about here. The shepherd has some authority. But I just so much prefer to think of this as, here's a guy who's figured it out, and I haven't, and I would like to follow you. That to me, I know that's not real world, and that's probably idealistic, but I would so much rather approach it in that way, even though we're going to have to, you're right to mention the word authority. We'll have to talk about that. Go ahead with your follow.
In the context, I think we're trying to apply it from Jesus to what real leadership in the congregation is, but Jesus is not talking about his authority here to hit people and discipline them and get them back in line. He's saying his authority is to lay down his life and to pick it up again. And that authority is from the Father. And I think that's really significant to what Christian leadership is like.
Yeah, and that's next. Pause. We'll go to Stuart, and I'll come back to you. Stuart?
Yes, I mean, my comment was to be around verses 1 to 2, you have a 1 4, he is not a threat.
I can't hear. I'm sorry. Thank you. Thank you.
Verses 1 and 2, he's not a threat. So you don't read in this 1 through 18 where he's not taking a stick and hitting the sheep. So back to what Ed was talking about, they don't trust that when they approach the shepherd, when they come to the shepherd, that they're gonna be helped and not hurt. And so the goal is not to beat the sheep into submission. It is to build up and encourage and to demonstrate and basically model the way. That's what a leader does in front. We talked earlier about from behind driving. That's what cowboys do. Okay? So cowboys drive the sheep from behind and they prod them and stick them. That's not what a shepherd does.
Yeah.
When that relationship that we talked about is one that's established and the foundation is trust, because everyone's trusting that we all want to get to the same place.
Yeah. Good. The difference between leading and driving, those are different, right? Okay, I just want to read this and then I'll get to my last point here. Well, maybe a couple more points. The sheep won't follow a stranger. I looked up the definition of stranger and the different places where it's used. Here's one biblical lexicon on the word. The most satisfactory rendering of stranger is often someone who is not known. I don't know you. And you don't know me. You don't know me. That's the relationship. Relationship has got to be the thing. Okay, verse 11 is a good conversation. I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. And probably while we talk about this, let's go ahead and do 12 and 13 at the same time. He who is a hired hand and not a shepherd, who does not own the sheep, sees the wolf coming and leaves the sheep and flees, and the wolf snatches them and scatters them. He flees because he is a hired hand and cares nothing for the sheep. So the shepherd sees the wolf and says, it's time to fight a wolf. The hired hand sees a wolf and says, I'm getting out of here. What's going on there? What's the conversation? Like, why is this, and what is this, and what is it teaching that we're after and looking for?
It's just that picture of relationship again. It's just sacrificial. It's a picture of Jesus. He's completely invested, far above what we even can comprehend. In verse 11 for New King James, it says the shepherd gives. I mean, it's just this sacrificial, selfless love, and that a hired hand isn't invested, just like you have up there. The wolf comes, I'm out. The tireless pursuit of safety, driven from love, is a shepherd. I mean, it's just overwhelming to think that they would just be constantly on the watch for their sheep.
Yeah.
That's Jesus.
Yeah. And, I mean, you talk about it, and let's push it all the way to the limit that Jesus pushes it to. Lays down his life for the sheep. This is where, I don't know how to articulate this one very well. This is where I think you see it or you don't. And I'm not sure if that's right. You can push back if you want, but I think you see it or you don't. And what I mean by that is, I can't ask you to sacrifice your life for this. That's not something that I feel like I can ask a person to do. That's something that you have to be willing and ready to do. And so that's what I'm trying to say, why you have it or you don't. I don't necessarily think that I can criticize and say, you should suffer more, you should suffer more. I think that's just, you are this, Jesus was this. Nobody prodded Jesus into doing what he did. He did it because that's what he did.
I think this goes back to the relationship that we talked about. You have a relationship with the sheep, then you're invested. It's important to you for it being your sheep. Not for any other reason, not because of the wool, not because of the meat or the milk or whatever. It's because of the sheep, and that's where. So it goes back to what we were just talking about the relationships.
Gen Z, yeah.
Well, the same thing, but I was thinking, I think we tend to think of things kind of in we draw back too much. So when you're looking, we keep talking about the shepherd and the sheep and the shepherd and the sheep, the shepherd knows the sheep. But put it in terms that we have experience with. What is your dog's name?
Boyer.
Okay.
Man.
Boyer?
Yeah.
Okay. You know Boyer.
Your dog's
Oh,
name.
your dog.
Rocky.
Oh, well, he's a Boyer too. He's a part of our family. It's Rocky.
I was gonna roll with it. You know your dog's name.
Yeah.
You know that dog. And if you're at a dog park and a threat comes in, say a wolf, whatever, you're going to save your dog, more than likely, from that animal. Now, if opportunity presents itself, you might would also chuck some other dogs over the fence, right? But you are willing to step in and grab yours.
Yeah.
You have a personal relationship with that dog. And a shepherd, especially in what we're talking about, they didn't have, it wasn't like, now we have a chicken farm, and they definitely have not named all those chickens. They don't live that long, and they have bajillions of them. They don't even know what they look like on sight. That's not the same relationship. We're talking about a shepherd who has a finite number, a small, manageable number of sheep, and he knows the personalities of each one individually. So to lose them, what Steve was saying, is it's not just a matter of the monetary loss. It's not even just a matter of the loss of life. He's going to miss that sheep. He's going to be sad that little Freddie got killed.
Yeah. Yeah. I think about the Passover lamb too, where you bring it into your house. That's a good one. One last thing. I know that there's maybe more comments here, but there's one last thing, because this is our last class on shepherds. But verse 16 mentions this thing that I think is worth, Jesus says it. I mean, obviously it's worth paying attention to. Jesus said it. I have other sheep that are not of this fold. I must bring them also, and they will listen to my voice, so there will be one flock and one shepherd. I think, now I probably have to tell you this about this. There's a couple of different ways of understanding what Jesus is doing here in this verse. But I think what Jesus is doing in this verse is describing Gentiles. And so he's saying, here are my Jewish people, you're my flock, but I have sheep who are not in this flock. They're out there. And what Jesus says he's going to be doing is going out to get those Gentile people. And then he talks about the whole thing. How does he summarize the whole thing at the end of verse 16? He says, so there will be one flock, one shepherd. And so I see this concept here that the shepherd's job is to go out and to collect, no, that's not a good way to say it, to unify, to bind together a group of people who may not necessarily have been born in the same flock or belong to the same flock, but the shepherd brings them together into this flock, and he uses the word one here because he is a unifier. So there will be one flock, one shepherd. And that's a huge one. You know, there's some of us here who have some pretty similar backgrounds, but some of us here are very different, and I'm sure that our paths never would have crossed in this life were it not for Jesus. And yet here we are together in the same place. And sometimes that's dirty. You know, it's hard to keep that together sometimes. But the shepherd is able to, because it's the flock and he's the shepherd and he's at least trying. So the unity is the one that I would throw up there. There will be one flock, one shepherd. Okay, that's probably enough for shepherd. Next time what we'll do is we'll move into some other elder conversations. But who are they? Elders, overseers, shepherds. You should have a really good picture in your head of what that looks like and what that means at this point. All right. Thanks for your input this morning. That was a helpful class.